Welcome back to another episode of Better Than I Found It, the podcast All Things College Golf. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor University. Today's guest is former University of Houston golfer Mike Booker. Mike not only played on the 1977 NCAA championship team, but he remains close to the program today. He also holds the record for the most Texas Golf Association titles and is a 2019 Texas Golf Hall of Fame inductee, as well as the author of the Tournament Golfer's Playbook, a terrific guide for young aspiring players. Mike and I also discuss his opinions as to why his coach in college, the legendary Dave Williams, was so successful. I think you'll really enjoy this interview. Okay, Better Than I Found It listeners, join me in welcoming Texas amateur golf legend Mike Booker to the podcast today. Mike, thanks for being on the podcast with me today.
Oh, Coach, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, I've been looking forward to this for a lot of reasons. I have a mixture of people. I have current players, former players, guys that I've coached against, recruited against, coaches, tour players. I've had all kinds of guys. You're probably the most unique guy I've had on here yet, because not only were you a college golfer, but you've done very well in the business world, but you've become sort of an amateur golf legend in Texas. So I've been looking forward to this. One, I want to talk about your recent publication of a book called The Tournament Golfer's Playbook that you wrote. I read my copy, love it, think it's fantastic. And one of the things you did a great job of is the chapters are short. They're easy to read. You can pick it up, put it back down, whatever, and get right back to it. I love that book. We're going to talk about that in detail. You were a 2019 inductee into the Texas Golf Hall of Fame, next to guys like Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, Jackie Burke, Kathy Whitworth. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That's quite a group of people you're in there with. I want to talk about that. And then finally, I definitely want to talk about your time at the University of Houston playing for legendary coach Dave Williams. To me, he's one of the most intriguing figures in the history of college golf. And a good friend of mine, a guy I worked for, Mike Holder at Oklahoma State, had a great amount of respect for. But they also had a competitive drive between the two of them that I want to talk about. So
no doubt.
Got a lot I want to hit today. Just want to thank you again for coming on to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, so sometimes I do these a little bit chronologically, let's start from the beginning and how you got to where you are today and how your story came about. But so how did you get into the game? Who was your biggest influence? In your book, you mentioned Lee Myers. Talk to me about Coach Lee Myers.
Sure. Well, when I was 13, back in 1968, I played all sports. Whatever sport was in season, I played baseball, basketball, football. Our family was very sports oriented, but I couldn't have given you directions to the nearest golf course. Just wasn't on my radar at all. So one summer when I was 13, I went to my junior high school and they had a half-day summer program. And the summer program was where we played all sports. I mean, that was right up my alley. I loved it. We had a blast. One morning I show up and Coach Myers, who was running the camp, said, "Hey, boys, today we're going to play golf." And he had a bunch of old golf balls, a bunch of old clubs. He had taken broom handles and put them out on the football field and drew a circle around them and said, "Here we go." And I sincerely said to him, I said, "Coach, thanks a lot, but I have no interest in playing golf, and I'll just see you tomorrow." And I turned around and started to walk away. And he yelled over my shoulder. He said, "Well, that's okay, Book." He said, "Go on home. You wouldn't be any good at this anyway." And he knew exactly what to say, because I turned around to give some smart aleck remark, and he stuck a club in my hand. And a week later, I had my own set of clubs. I talked to my football, basketball, baseball coaches, and I told them all I wasn't going to be playing their game anymore. And the golf bug just bit me hard, and I don't think it stopped since.
Well, he was a sports psychologist. He used reverse psychology to get you to play the game.
Yeah, and what's really terrific about him, because I admire him so much and I give him as much credit as I can when I can, is that my dad left our home when I was 2 years old. And this was a time in my life that I think for all teenagers, it's difficult at best. And he was an adult male figure that came along and really filled that gap for me. In fact, we became so close that when I became of age to go to high school. High school where I grew up started at 10th grade. He applied for the coaching job, the golf coach job at my high school, and got it. And
Mm.
so we went to high school together. And so every tournament I played in, everything I did, he was kind of like any other parent, just kind of hung on every stroke and was a guiding light for me, not just on the golf course, but very much off the golf course. Perfect guy to show up in my life at the perfect time.
Wow. I think that's divine providence right there. That's pretty amazing. And so he got you into the game, actually coerced you into the game without you knowing it. And but you had to play the junior golf schedule too. Now, I'm gonna make the assumption that your junior golf schedule was a little different than the kids in Houston, Texas today play. Well, you weren't in Houston at the time. You were in
I was in,
California, correct?
yeah, in LA area. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Night and day. I did play a pretty full schedule in terms of tournaments. What back then, so we're looking at the late 60s, early 70s, clubs, private clubs would host a tournament, and it'd be a one-day junior tournament, and we'd all show up and play. Never played a practice round, and because they wouldn't allow us to play twice. We played once, and so it was wonderful. It was very fun. We always had a great time, but there was only a couple of tournaments that were more than just one day. We had the state junior, of course, and Junior World they played down in San Diego and things like that. But no, it was very simplified. It was kind of a one and done golf
Mhm.
tournament.
Well, when I played in Oklahoma growing up, we didn't really play a national schedule. I think I played in the Junior Orange Bowl in Miami, and I played in the Western Junior in Albuquerque one year. But the rest of the golf was played in Oklahoma. And so you
Sure,
played most of your junior golf probably in California.
one hundred
But
percent.
well, how in the world did you get to Houston, Texas? I mean, I know that at the time Dave Williams had the best golf program in college golf, but that's a long way. How'd you get out to Houston?
Well, it's interesting. I started to win some tournaments and got a little bit of attention. Scott Simpson beat me in the semifinals of the state match play, and started to get a little bit of attention that way. And Stan Wood was the golf coach at USC, and I went to visit with him, and I went to UCLA, and I started talking to the guys there, and what they told me was that, for example, USC played Riviera, which was really a drawing card. But when I found out they played, at the time they were going to play Riviera Thursdays after 3 o'clock, sort of thing. So it really wasn't quite what it appeared to be. And Coach Meyer said, you know what? If you get a chance, you need to go to Texas where you can play golf. You can play in some not perfect weather all the time, and you can really have a chance to play a lot of golf as opposed to, you know, one day a week after three. So I was recruited by those schools. They knew me better than Coach Williams did, but for some reason, Coach Williams got interested in me, and when he did, his great skill set was recruiting. He went By the time I was offered a scholarship and signed to go to U of H, I was getting something. It seems like every week I was getting a clipping out of the school newspaper or out of the Chronicle, or it just was amazing. By the time I came to, got in my 1970 Mustang and drove out to Texas, I felt like I was already part of the team. I knew everybody's name. They reached out to me. So I think his great skill set, and we can talk about that some more, was his recruiting.
Well, Mike Holder always told me that when he was at Oklahoma State. He said, "Yeah, the guy didn't even play golf, and he could out recruit me on players." And Mike was an All-American in college. Mike was a great player. It was like he just he knew people, and that was one of the things I've talked to other UH graduates that said he understood human nature as well as anybody they'd ever met, and so he was able to, I guess, play off that and recruit kids into coming and playing for him. I mean,
I
is that
think
the way
that
he got you there?
it is. Of course, the program was very
Mm-hmm.
dynamic, and that was in my view, that was like the dream of all dreams, because they were always the top three rated teams, and the always, they come to Texas, and again, I never even visited the campus. When I received a scholarship and it was time to come to school, I got in my car and drove to Texas and never even saw the campus. I didn't even know where it was. And of course, we didn't have any cell phones to guide us the way. I just had a little map. So, but Coach Williams definitely understood how we thought. I think the fact that he didn't play golf worked greatly to his advantage. He was actually an engineer professor. He taught engineering at University of Houston. So I think that if you're asking me, I think that his real gift was that he because he was such a good recruiter, he didn't really clog any of our heads with how he thought we should hit the ball, how we thought we should do this or do that. I think his basic philosophy was, I know you're a really good player, and I'm going to stay out of your way. And so and we had 25 guys on the team at that time. And so he created this sort of cauldron. He threw everybody in the deep end. Some people, swam to the shore, and some people drowned. And I think by creating that sort of situation, he naturally had the best players rise to the top. But I guess an engineer thinks, it's a numbers. Give me your number. I don't really care how you get there. And that's old school, I suppose. But it obviously worked better than any program that's come before or since.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And two things I remember that I learned through, I guess probably through Mike Holder or some other players. One, there was one day when the guys in the team were arguing and griping about all the qualifying they were doing. They were so upset. We never have time to practice, and you just qualify too much, coach. And he looked at me and he says, okay. And they were supposed to be there for a qualifying round that day. They go over to the first tee and he says, guys, today we're going to have a one-hole qualifying. The 5 best scorers are going to the tournament. And so they had a playoff, obviously, because there were ties on the hole. The guys were furious that he had a but it was like, are you kidding me? You're going to gripe about all the qualifying we're doing. I'll just get it down to the least amount of qualifying possible.
Wow.
And I think he was brilliant. And my brother, Tim, who's 3 years older than I am, was one of the best players in Oklahoma. And he was actually being recruited by Coach Williams. And I remember a little pamphlet it wasn't a pamphlet. It was like a book, almost like a media guide that he sent my brother. And I kept on thinking, gosh, you'd have to go to this place. They have won everything and they've won it a lot. But Dave Williams was, I don't know. I think he was pure genius for his day. He wrote a book. Did you ever know that?
Yes.
Okay. I've got a copy of it, How to Coach and Play Championship Golf. And I still think it's one of the best books because when I read through there, you can tell what a great promoter he was. And so I want to ask you about this because Mike Holder once told me the All-American was the greatest college golf tournament in the history of college golf. Today, then, before, after. You played in the All-American. That was a big event.
It was a big event. I think, again, he used his recruiting skills to recruit other teams. They felt like they were missing out if they weren't there to compete. And it was at Atascocita in my years. Prior to that, it was at a different course. So it was at a decent golf course, but the golf course wasn't going to really cause a team to make a decision to come or not. They just didn't want to be left out. I don't want to present him as as this promoter type, but I'll never forget. And I know the other teams didn't forget. One year he brought the whole cheerleader team out. The same ones that were at football games and basketball games. Yeah. And we were behind the 18th green. And, guy make a putt on our team, the cheerleaders just exploded with their cheers. And so I'll never forget that image of seeing these beautiful girls on the back of the 18th green. And I'm sure all the other teams thought that was pretty unusual too. But I think he got everybody to come there because, nobody wanted to miss out on competing against the best teams. And each team sort of built on each other that they wanted to be there.
Yeah, it was definitely an event you pined to go play in. And it was actually on television for a while. He had television reporters out there. It was, I just look back on that. And I think to me, that was really the golden age of college golf, even though it was in a way different era, but to have had an event that was that special and that people still talk about today, pretty amazing. So you had what was your daily routine like? Like today, their days are filled in college golf. They truly are. Was Dave a micromanager, or did Coach Williams actually allow you guys to do a little bit on your own? How did that look?
I would say he was the opposite of a micromanager. Again, that same thought is, I recruited you because you're beating everybody in your area, and I expect you to do well here. And if you don't, okay, you don't, but there will always be somebody there. Our basic rule for when we played, and of course we had Keith Ferguson, we had Ed Fiore. Those guys were, coach even told me one time, I'm not even bother having those guys qualify. That'd be ridiculous. And I was probably a good solid number 3 player at the time behind them. But if you played a couple of bad tournaments in a row, maybe you were the 5th score a couple of times, you were subject to qualifying. But our daily look would be we wouldn't necessarily see coach on a regular basis. The top 4 guys, which was usually, in my junior year, it was Keith and Ed and myself and John Stark, let's say, and we would play the top courses in Houston just every day, and we the guys who were out of the top 4, which were quite a few, another 20 some guys, were playing various courses all around. So we were really I have to say, we were left on our own. And I think that there were times that came up where coach wanted to visit with you about something. So it wasn't like he was totally hands off, but when it came to the golf, he pretty much stayed out of the way.
Well, there's a little bit of genius in there. Truly there is, Mike, because I think if our generation, my generation, which actually I'm now almost a past generation, but generally coaches today think more is always better, and I've got to have an influence every moment of every day. Sometimes you need to, maybe you just say something to a kid and you leave him alone for a few days and it percolates in his brain and he comes up with something. But I think Dave Williams' generation was more like, these kids are going to figure out things on their own. I'll be a guide. I don't know. I think you were really, really fortunate to play for Dave Williams.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. I will say that sometimes when I'm at a barbecue or maybe a party of some kind, and you will have a friend of a kid that didn't make the team, that didn't do so well, and I want to say that which is human nature, that they would badmouth coach. Coach played his favorites, and because it's always a mystery when you beat everybody in your area, but you're not making the team. All your friends, everybody around you says, what's the problem? And so the problem is really you didn't perform and you just weren't good enough. You're playing at a super high level, but human nature is that, well, coach didn't like me and coach was unfair. And of course, my answer to all those when I hear that is you don't win 16 national titles by playing who you like the best. Sometimes it could be just the opposite for that matter. We all know that. So I do want to say to everybody out there, Coach Williams was not a perfect guy, but he was a wonderful coach. And you're exactly right. We were all blessed to be associated with him, to know him. I'm still, his son Joel and I are good friends. Joel still lives in the area. And he was just a fine man. And I'm always grateful to have been part of this program.
Well, I think you're good to say that. And I think it's true. But I'm going to tell you a story you don't know, and I want to surprise you with this one. But and Mike Holder told me this story, so this is coming straight from Mike. In 1977, he had one of the best teams he's probably ever coached in his career. They only lost one tournament that year. It was to Houston.
By one stroke.
Okay, you know the tournament I'm talking about. But at Arizona State's tournament, you all finished 5th. You didn't play well. And they won by a lot. They won by 38 shots. I think beat you guys by 63 shots. And
it was bad.
It was bad. Mike's a young coach, so he's in his 4th year. Let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 4th year. He's already won a national championship. They were defending national champions. He's got a team right now that he just thinks is the best maybe he's ever coached. Tom Seekman was on that team, but was number 6 man, never made the squad, won twice on the PGA Tour. It's like this was a great team. And they just win this tournament by 38. And Dave Williams came over to congratulate him. And the Southern drawl, that voice he had.
Oh, yeah.
He said, Coach Holder, nice playing this week. Your boys did really well. He said, come June in Hamilton, New York, you're going to want some of these strokes back. And
is that right?
He said, and he just shook his hand and walked off. And Mike, being a young coach, was kind of dumbfounded, like, what does he mean by that? What does he mean by that? Well, fast forward 2 months, you guys beat him by 8 shots there at Hamilton, New York. And Mike told me that story unannounced one day. He told me that story because I said, is this going to be the best team we've ever had at Oklahoma State? And he said, no, I think the best team I ever had. And he told that story. And he said, Dave Williams knew something I didn't know.
How about that? What a great story. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, that was Number one thing, and that's right. I've told 1,000 times, and when people ask me about that year, 77 NCAA, I always start out with, well, we weren't really supposed to win. We kind of knew that. We weren't, self-defeating in that at all because it was game on when the flag went up. But it was very tough conditions. It rained the entire time. It was a light rain. I remember I got up during the night and stuck my hand out the window, and it was still a light rain. It was just miserable. And so I think one of the things that was great about our team is that we were tough, and we didn't like to lose. Let me tell you, I remember that sting of those 38 strokes when we were out at that tournament where they played so well. And I remember watching those guys make the turn. They were turning, Lindy Miller was turning it in 32, and Jaime Gonzalez turning it in 31. I'm thinking, oh my God, what is going on here? This is crazy. So they really lit it up. We didn't play well, but they played fantastic. So when it came to the NCAA, I think we were just, sometimes when you're the favorite, it's a little bit harder to maybe put a good number up. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe the really difficult weather, the rain and everything else. The last day, it quit raining, but it was a big wind. And so I think that for us, the great thing about our team that year, with Fergus the year before, we were picked to do well. Without Fergus, nobody was really expecting us to do anything, but we had heart, and golf is a microcosm of life. As soon as you assume something's going to happen, it doesn't, and maybe even the opposite happens. And I think that was one of those situations.
Well, I think it was the foreshadowing effect of that comment that Dave Williams made in Scottsdale. I mean, because Mike never forgot that. And it was something he always thought about his whole career. And I think what he thought about was don't ever get too full of yourself and don't ever lose respect for your opponent. You may have a fantastic team, but by golly, you respect everyone. And maybe for that moment, he was pretty on top of the world, and Dave just brought him back down and said, "You're going to wish you had some of those strokes in June."
Well, that sounds like Coach to me. That sounds just like something he'd say, and he'd say it in a nice way.
He did. He said
Yep.
it in a great way. Yeah, yeah. So I actually only met him one time, but and he would have remembered me, but I did have a lot of respect for what he was able to do. So you guys win the national championship there in Hamilton, New York. Just briefly tell me what are your great memories? I know John Stark finished third, Ed Fiore 11th, David Ishii 13th. I think your score counted 3 of the 4 rounds for your team.
Something like that. I didn't really have that great of a tournament. I wish I'd played better. But it was a great example of believing in yourself. And we definitely, when you create a situation where you've got all this competition at home with all these great players, when we were competing with each other at home in the qualifiers, this and that, it was, serious business. But when we were together, when we were on the road and really trying to make this team really get together and win tournaments, we were the best of friends and we were rooting for each other. And so I think there was always great camaraderie, and we'd give each other a hard time, and so we really had a great time with it. When we won the NCAA, I'll tell you a story that's in the book that when I wrote a piece in the book about perspective, and one of the, I have to say, life-changing events that happened to me, I came into the 72nd hole, and of course the format back then was teed up and add 'em up, no match play. I love the new format, but the way we played is the best score each day. So I came in 18. I knew that it was tight. I knew that it was close. It was a par 5. I wedged it about 10 feet from the hole, and I felt like if I could make this putt, obviously every shot counts. So I ran the putt by the hole, missed the 3-footer coming back. And, I'm a kid, and as I say in the book, I feel like I had the weight of the entire school on my shoulders, all 32,000 people just groaning at the same time. So I stormed off the green, and I headed for the locker room. I smashed open the door of the locker room. I just was beside myself. I just was losing it. And you had to go upstairs to the locker room in Hamilton, and halfway down the stairs is about a 12-year-old young man. He's in crutches, and you can tell the crutches are not the kind where you sprain your ankle, but they were the metal kind that fit around his forearms. This kid was really struggling to get down the stairs. And talk about divine intervention. It felt like my whole body drained all the anger, all the despair, all the drama. drained out of me as I saw this young boy coming down the stairs, and I went up the first few stairs to see if I could help him down, but I completely forgot about that putt. And I learned such a great lesson there, is that even, one of the things you probably struggle with as a coach is to help people have, the young men, young ladies have perspective. And that was my instant karma right there. I instantly realized, wait a minute, this kid's going to be struggling his whole life. This is just one episode in yours.
Hmm. Golly, that's a really good story. And I actually read that 2 days ago in your book and thought it was really, it's like one of those moments you never forget and affects you the rest of your life. And so when you lose a golf tournament, yeah, it stings and it hurts, and we're all competitors. But when it comes right down to it, it's other people are struggling more than that three putt you had right there. But you guys ended up winning that day, so it was another way to to soothe the wounds, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. Did Coach Williams get you guys rings or not? Did you guys get rings in those days?
We did. We got beautiful rings. I wear it to all the U of H functions. I'm still involved with the golf team, involved with the sports program at University of Houston. So I always make sure I wear my ring.
That's great. Yeah. So you win a national championship in 1977, and you go to the tour qualifying, correct? Is that next fall?
Exactly
And
right.
you get your PGA Tour card.
Right.
Talk about that, the very end, how you got it, because I did read that in the book, which was really good. And then I want to go to a putting lesson you got from somebody that we all know about.
You
But go
bet.
ahead.
You
Yeah.
bet. So right out of college, we go to back then the tour school to get your card on the PGA Tour, and it was a 3-stage process. And I think there was something like, starts with about 5,000 people, and then there's a local and then regional and finals. So we were at the finals. Ed Fiore and I were rooming together, and the first day I shot 76, and I was in 93rd place, and they were going to take 25. And so I was really in danger of missing the cut as well. The next day, an incredible storm hit, about a legitimate 30-mile-an-hour wind. I remember hitting a wedge to one of the par fives for my second shot. It was brutal. And I shot 71 and took myself to about 8th place. So now I'm in good shape. It's the last round. I'm coming into the last hole at Pinehurst number 4, good par 4. I hit a really good drive. I tug a 5-iron into the front bunker, but no big deal, kind of a standard bunker shot. And as a theme in my book, throughout my book, is talking about staying in the present, working your process. Don't get result oriented. Just stay right where you're at, execute. Anyway, I jump into this bunker, and I'm a 22-year-old kid, and I start thinking, this is my dream come true. I'm going to be a tour player. I can't believe it. I'm going to be a tour player. This is all I've ever wanted. And of course, I'm immediately in what I call in the book results oriented thinking clearly. And what do? I blade this bunker shot across the green into the back bunker. Now the world starts to spin. Things really accelerate. I start to hear myself tell my friends, oh, I doubled the last hole and I didn't get my tour card. All of these thoughts going through my head. Even though I was a young man, I had experimented and used breathing as a way to get back to the present. So as I talk about in one of the chapters about breathing, so I immediately start counting my breaths. And if you've ever tried to count your breaths, even sitting at a desk, it's really difficult to get past 5 breaths, 5 cycles without your mind wandering. But anyway, I started to count my breaths. And of course, the other 2 guys are on the green, so it's still my shot. So they're waiting for me to go, gather myself and go to anyway, long story short, I counted my breaths. I just tried to bring myself back to the present, and I succeeded at that, and just got focused on this next bunker shot. It was a downhill bunker shot, had a little bit of a downhill lie. I can see that ball sitting there right now, and just put out of my mind all the negative of a double bogey if I didn't get it up and down. I did get it up and down. I can't remember if I'd love to tell you I hit it a foot from the hole clutch. I don't remember, but I remember I got it up and down for a 5. And I, at that time, I was the youngest player on tour. I got my card, and that January took off to Tucson.
Wow, good story. Yeah, I think breathing is a way underrated part of how to get in the moment, but it does bring you into the moment when you breathe and you think about your breath. So
Exactly right. And
uh,
again, it's all about, I was so young and just, is typical of a younger person to think of so much about results that their whole process gets thrown out the window. And that was a classic example. And that's a moment that I'll never forget as well. And I'm glad it had a happy ending.
Yeah, that's for sure. And that was way before they used the term process. It was just that's something you were just trying to figure out. You didn't call it the process at the time in 1977, but that's what they call it today.
Yep.
Okay, speaking of process, one of the greatest players in the history of the game, and an absolute Texas legend and a Houston legend and a legend out at Champions is a guy named Jackie Burke Jr. And I want you to talk me through this because I have a story about Jackie Burke as well, but I want to talk me through a putting lesson you got from him in 1977.
Absolutely. And that was one of the stories in the book. So here I am out on tour, and I'm struggling and particularly having issues with my putting. And so I had met Mr. Burke a couple of times, and he'd always been really good to me. He's just a fine guy, a fine man. And I called him up out of the blue, and I said, Mr. Burke, it's Mike Booker. We met a couple of times. I'm struggling with the putter. Would you mind giving me a putting lesson? And he said, no, of course. Come on over, Mike. And so I drove over to Champions here in Houston, and got there, and it was a huge Texas thunderstorm hit. So we went into his office, and he watched me stroke the ball and whatnot. And he said, he gave me the greatest advice that I've ever received in my life. And all these years I've been playing golf, and I didn't appreciate it. I didn't understand it, even as simple as it was. And what he said was, he says, Book, he said, never try and make a putt. And 22-year-old Mike Booker looked at him like, I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking about? But I was respectful, of course. And Mr. Burke, when Mr. Burke was in a room, when he was talking to you, you better listen. And so he commanded your attention. And so he gave me the lesson, and I picked up those things. But the last thing I was thinking about was his advice to never try and make a putt. What he was telling me was, and I didn't understand it, didn't know it till many years later, is the process. He was emphasizing that once you hit the ball, you're done. You can't control what that ball is going to do. All you can do is read the putt, pick your line, and hit the ball down that line, and you're done. And so, which is classic process, not really, he was telling me, and I didn't understand it, he was telling me, don't worry about the result, because that just messes up the act of hitting a good putt. It messes up your process. But I'll never forget, I thought to myself, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard in my life. And honestly, when people ask me of a putting tip, or they ask me, what's the best advice you've ever received, I tell them that story. And I would say certainly 70%, maybe 50 to 70% of the people look at me the same way I must have looked at Mr. Burke, like, that makes no sense at all. But if you think about it, if you're on the last hole to win a tournament, who's going to make that putt, that 5-foot putt? The person who's thinking about their process, I'm just going to roll the ball and see what happens, or the person that says, oh my God, I might win the golf tournament if I can just make this putt. And by that time, you're so far away from being in the present, you've jumped too far ahead of yourself, and it makes it very difficult to do that very thing you're trying to do, which is to stroke the ball into the hole.
Well, thank you for the story. I read it in the book, but to hear you recant it is really, really good. And it does underscore simplistic wisdom that the older generation had. I mean, my dad was the same way. He would just say one little thing to you and then walk off. And you're going, wait, I've got to process what he just said. But it was simple information right there. And I think it's just as true and just as valid today.
I do too. And it's interesting. If you can actually get on the golf course, I don't care if you're competing or just out with your buddies, and all your goal that day on the greens is to roll your stripe. I draw a stripe on the ball like so many other players do. If my goal is just to roll the ball, if that's my goal, and I'm not really worried, I truly am not worried about whether it goes in or not. That's when you absolutely run the table. You'll make everything, which makes it that much harder to go back to thinking about this process.
Well, my Jackie Burke story is a little different. I played the sectional qualifying for the U.S. Open in 1984 at Champions, and stayed on property with very nearby with a friend of mine who lived down there. But I only got to meet him. I didn't get to talk to him or anything. Just met him briefly, and then probably 25 years later, I'm the golf coach at Oklahoma State, and we are going down to Texas for spring break. We've got a tournament on the front end of spring break in Austin, and then we were going to go over to Houston one day in between, play champions, and then we played a tournament in Houston at the Golf Club of Houston at the end of spring break. So we had the whole week taken up. I called champions and asked to speak to Mr. Burke, and he got on the phone. He says, "Yes, how can I help you, coach?" And I said, "Well, we're going to be coming down there. I was wondering if we could come by and pay a green fee and play." He said, "You're not paying a green fee. You're my guest that day. When will you be here?" So I told him, and so we got there about 11 o'clock, and he said, "Come on in here." And he went in, and we had lunch, and he sat down and ate lunch with us. And then the guys went out to the putting green and range, and he brought me into his office, and he had a box of books, and they were the before market books of It's Only a Game that he wrote in 2006, and they hadn't gone yet on the market. I knew about the book. He signed one to me. He spent 4 hours with our guys that day. He gave Trent Leon the best putting lesson he had ever had, and Trent, I don't know if he won the next week, but he played well. My point was, Jackie Burke Jr., a three-time major champion, Hall of Famer, gave me 4 hours of his day and comped us on his golf course that day. I'll never forget that as long as I live.
And that's classic Jackie Burke. You know, he wouldn't charge me for my putting lesson. He was glad to do it. He's been consistently a wonderful supporter of amateur golf.
Without question. Yeah, I was so impressed by that day. And he is now the oldest living major champion in history. And it's pretty amazing. I don't know how he's doing. I sure hope he is doing well. I pray for him. But he's just been a legend for many, many years.
And even well into his 90s, he still would go out to the range and hit balls. He can still hit the ball. It's been about 3 years ago. We had the Texas Shootout, which is a Ryder Cup between the North and the South, and it was the champions. And he went out there and hit balls, and there were 20 of us around him just watching him hit it. It was fantastic. And he's 90 at the time. He's like 92 or 3.
Yeah, what a great communicator, what a great teacher, what a great ambassador for the game of golf. I mean, Jackie Burke Jr. is just an absolute, complete, iconic legend in my opinion.
Totally agree.
Well, thank you for that story. I'm going to ask about another Texas legend. She ended up spending a lot of time in Texas. I think she's from Chicago, Illinois originally, but Carol Mann, who won a Women's U.S. Open. She's a LPGA Hall of Famer. She grew up at a golf course that's one of my favorite in the whole world, Olympia Fields in Chicago, and they've got this massive display in the clubhouse of her trophies and photographs. So tell me about your relationship with Carol.
Carol and I were very close. When I first met her, you know, she's a very imposing person, and I typically had a cigarette dangling out of her mouth. And so a couple of things about Carol is because she was such a competitor and such a great player, I've always enjoyed taking lessons of any kind from someone that is actually a player. So we'd work on something on my swing that was physical in nature, trying to do this move, trying to do that move. And I talk about a little bit in the book. What a lot of teachers will do is, here's my method. If you'll do this, you'll do really well. So don't worry about it. Let's just work really hard on this method. Carol was not that way. Carol was, let's work with what you've got, and here's what I think you need to work on. But because she was such a wonderful, successful competitor, she understood that, hey, you may get out there in the tournament and all this goes to you know what. And so she would always give me a plan B. She'd always say, well, what you need to do if this doesn't work is do this. And whereas a method teacher would just say, hey, just do the method and you're going to be okay. I remember going to Carol one time, and I told her, I said, look, I've got about 5 different swings. One is where the arms start the downswing. One is where I do this, or do that. I said, I want to spend the whole day with you, Carol, and I want to have you pick what you think is the best swing, and I'm just going to forget about these other swings, and I'm going to work on that swing, which to me made a lot of sense. However, Carol, because she's so wise, she said, look, there isn't a player on the tour that doesn't have at least 3 or 4 swings. And she said that, and she talked about Johnny Miller. If you ever see an interview with Johnny Miller, it's true. When they asked him, you know, he won the Open shooting a 63 the last day, that the first 4 holes, he kind of struggled. He was kind of clanking the ball with the swing he'd used all week. And he actually went to a plan B swing in shooting a 63. So that was a great lesson for me because I felt like if this is the best swing for me, this is what I need to go with. But what I learned from Carol was great players have many different ways to do it. They're pragmatic. They're going to make something work, and they'll have a plan B and maybe a plan C and a plan D swing to go to.
Well, I recently talked to Randy Smith in Dallas at Royal Oaks, and he was talking about Scotty Scheffler, who he works with. And if you see this little low cut shot that Scotty hits off the tee, it's a fairway finder. It's when he gets uncomfortable, he's going to go to that shot every time. Now, it's 25 or 30 yards shorter than the other one, but it finds that fairway. And that's a different swing. It's a different thought process, but he has to have it when he gets uncomfortable in competition.
I want to tell you one of my very favorite Carol Mann stories. And it really sums her up as a competitor and as a person, because she was a lovely person. There was a young man who was on a plane and recognized Carol and went up to her and said, "Hi, Miss Mann, my name is John Smith, and I wonder if you would mind giving me a lesson sometime, since I'm also from Houston." She said, "Absolutely, I'd love to." She said, "What do you want to do with your golf?" And I told all my friends when they would go to take a lesson from her, I said, "Listen, that first encounter with Carol, you must know what you want to do with your golf. It may be to break 80. It may be to win the club championship, or maybe to win the US Open, whatever it is. She's going to ask that question, and you best have an answer." Well, this young man was asked the question, "What do you want to do with your game?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. I think," and Carol said, "Stop right there." She said, go ahead and sit back down. And when you can come up with what you want to do with your game, come back and see me, and I'll be glad to help you. So she very much was, goal oriented, and very much wanted you to succeed at whatever it is you want to succeed at. But she wasn't going to waste time with you if you didn't have a pretty good vision of where you wanted to take your golf.
Well, that was pretty amazing. My dad was a club professional for years, and that was one of the things he would ask, the same type of question, like, "What are you trying to accomplish here?" And then one of the things he'd follow up with, and I'm sure she did the same, is if you came to the next lesson and you hadn't worked on those things that in between, you hadn't done any practice, any work, I mean, he wouldn't even give that lesson. It would be a waste of time. So, but anyway, maybe things have changed in the modern day. I don't know, but I think a lady like Carol Mann, who was not only a great player, and by the way, the tallest LPGA golfer, I think, in history at 6'3", but she wanted a very, very high rate. But then when she became a teacher later in life, she had the experience of having competed. She understood what a player was like. So you had to benefit from that experience.
No doubt about it. When I was at a tournament and struggling, I would text her, and of course she knew my swing, and she'd get right back. Here's plan, and again, here's plan A. And if that doesn't work, let's go with plan B and just kind of, get out of town, with whatever we can make work together for that day. She was when we lost Carol, it was just devastating because of our friendship and my love for her, but also I didn't have someone that I could text and say, "Oh my God, what do I do now?"
You better figure it out. Maybe she gave you enough knowledge through the years that you can handle it yourself now, Mike.
It's all written down.
There you go. I love it. I love it. Well, you've been referring to this book throughout this entire interview. So now I want to get kind of into the book and just, you wrote in the book that you mainly wrote this book for young players, junior golfers, and college golfers, and amateur golfers, people that need this kind of. And this is a compilation of basically 40 or 45 years or 50 years of your involvement in the game. So talk to me a little more specifically about the book, and for one, how can people get it, all of that.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. So a little bit of background. Coach Dismuke, a great coach at University of Houston, about 5-6 years ago, came to me and he said, "We've got a really talented group of players, but we're not getting the job done. And I wonder if you would mind coming to talk to them because you played all these years of tournaments." And I said, "Of course I would. I'd love to." So really, for the first time, I did an outline of what I thought was important. Things like knowing the difference between, the things you can control as a player and the things you can't. Staying in the present and really what that means. Designing a process, working the process, not obsessing about the result, and the importance of a pre-shot routine, which I think has been forgotten to some extent. And taking responsibility for every shot you hit. Don't being a victim. Anyway, positive self-talk, a lot of these things. And so I put them all down in an outline. And in the book, I put out there that there are really two sorts of golfers. As a recreational golfer, where goes out and plays with your buddies, maybe, have a beer, maybe you don't even keep score. And then there is the golfer that plays tournaments. And within the category of golfers who play tournaments, there are what I call the tournament golfer, who is not a victim, takes responsibility, has no excuses, has great self-talk. They are their own best friend. They surround themselves with good players. They work all of these process things that we've talked about, and they have no excuses. Then within the people that play tournaments, there are what I call in the book the golfers who play tournaments. So they're just the opposite. They always have an excuse. They may triple bogey the last hole and shoot par, and they want to tell all their friends or anybody that'll listen, gosh, I had it 3 under and I was doing great, and then I got this bad break and this happened and that happened. That's what I call the golfer who plays tournaments. And so I sat down with at the time about 20 of these U of H golfers, and I wanted to get their attention. And so I said, guys, you all think that you're tournament golfers, but I suspect that you're really just golfers who play tournaments. And what I meant was you're going through the motions and all these things that the golfer who plays tournaments does to really inhibit their success. These, being a victim, having excuses, all that goes with that. And so I began to talk about what it means to be in the present and how to keep yourself in the present. And we talked about breathing and these sorts of things, so that we've talked about today. And so I put that together, and they actually improved their ranking pretty dramatically. There were 4 or 5 of the guys I could tell really plugged into it. And then I did this a couple of more times for coach for teams after that. Then I started to think, well, let me expand on this just to sort of leave something behind. And I thought it might be the kind of thing that I'd have a few pages that I could type up and give it to friends and young people that maybe they can benefit from it. And then sort of all of a sudden it turned into a book. And before I knew what happened, it turned into a book. And I really thoroughly enjoyed putting all the stories are fun, and to illustrate the point. I didn't want the book to be about me so much, because there's really not anything in there that talks about, oh, I did this great or that great. What the book is really meant to do is, here's what I really did wrong, and here's don't let that happen to you. And using all of the things that I learned really from watching the great players that I played with over the years.
Well, good observational skills, obviously. But one of the other things you were able to do with the book, at the end of each chapter, there's a life hack, which basically is, this is kind of how what I just talked about relates to your everyday life. I thought those were really interesting, and a really good way for people to relate their life in golf to their life.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting. Some of the reviews that have been written about the book are by non-golfers that picked up on the life hack. And my thought there, Coach, was, when I really looked around, I realized that everything I've been able to achieve off the golf course is because of what I learned about myself and others on the golf course. I know that's very cliche, but it's really true. And so then I thought, well, if that's the case, then let's apply some of these same things off the golf course. There's a young man who just took a job with a company a couple of weeks ago. He was a All-American at University of Houston a few years back. Tried to make a go of it as a pro, very difficult to pull off. And he got to a kind of a turning point in his life where he had to decide what he wanted to do. And Coach Dismuke and myself have both mentored him. Anyway, he took this job. He's got a great job. He just started a couple of weeks ago. And what we talked about was, I said, okay, now everything that golf has taught you all this time along, apply this to this new position and you'll succeed. And he said, absolutely, I intend to. And so I think that golf has so much to teach us off of what we learned on the golf course, so much helpful to us in being successful off the golf course. I know I owe everything to it.
I couldn't agree more. And that my life in golf has literally helped my life off the golf course. So I'm thankful for that. Well, so before we move away from the book, how can people get it? Because I would suggest it and encourage it. It's a really, really good, easy read.
Well, thanks for that. So we set up a web page, and the web page is TG Playbook, as in tournament golfer playbook.com. You can go there, and it's got some other resources. One of the charities we're supporting is Youth on Course, which allows kids that can't afford to pay a green fee to offset their green fee so that they can play golf. And then some of the other background things. We have a few resources on there you might find interesting, but there's a button that says buy now. That's the one that takes you straight to Amazon to buy the book.
All right, well, that's simple. Well, that's fantastic, and I hope all my listeners at least consider checking it out. So I just have one question before we finish here. Two questions. One, are you going to play this year? You're going to compete? I'm assuming you're going to.
Yes, I still love to compete. The sad thing is, when I think when I turned 55 and I got to playing senior golf, I was probably in denial a couple years into it that I had gotten that old. And now next week I'm 68, and I feel like oh my God, I'm aging out of senior golf now too. But I still love to compete. I was fortunate enough to be a senior player of the year in Texas last year, which of the times I've received it in the past, I think this last one was the best because I was, as you get older, I still feel like I had the skill set, but to be able to prove it like that and do that and compete, that's the best. And I've always said, I've never really played golf for fun. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. I've always played it to test myself, to compete. And so that's always been my motivation to play golf, was to test myself. Golf is fun. I do enjoy the recreational golf too, but I love to compete. So yes, I'll be out there giving it my best.
Well, go get them this year. But one of the questions that I've asked a lot of podcast guests has been this: what's the best piece of advice you could give to a 14-year-old who wants to play college golf one day? I mean, speak to that 14-year-old who's listening today.
What a great question. So what I've noticed with the younger players, 14-year-old, is that they go out and they beat balls all day. And that's fine. That's part of the way that you get better. Obviously, taking lessons, having somebody like I had a Carol Mann, and I've got a Jared Jones now at River Oaks that really helps me. And I'm always still learning. I always tell people, if you had talked to 25-year-old Mike Booker and said, hey, when you're 68, you're still trying to figure this game out, I would have laughed my head off. I would have thought that was the silliest thing I ever heard. But that's the magic of golf, is that you're always still learning. So I would tell a 14-year-old, go ahead and bang all those balls. But more importantly, or at least just as importantly, is get yourself in competition, get in the tournament, and really get out there and screw up and understand why you screwed up. And I would say that you probably got ahead of yourself, or you were beating yourself up because of a prior hole that you made a double bogey on or something. But really get out and get in as much competition as you can. Doesn't have to be the national championship, but get into all those tournaments. Learn how to win. Learn how to control yourself, and observe those players that are beating your butt, what they're doing that you're not doing. I think that would be the critical thing. And obviously, all the other things, don't get down on yourself, don't beat yourself up, be your own best friend, understand all that. But number one thing I would say is get out there and compete. And if it's not your thing, that's okay too. Enjoy the game. But if you want to compete, you want to play college golf, you got to get under the gun as often as you can.
I love that. And it's something I've been preaching for a lot of years, maybe not the same words, but the same sentiment. You don't get better just on a driving range. That's part of the process, but it's not the only thing. You've got to compete. So, Mike, thank you so much for spending an hour with me today. I really, really enjoyed the stories. And I know that the listeners that listen today, I know they'll enjoy your book. So I hope they grab a copy.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you getting it and reading it. And I'm so grateful to be on your podcast. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Well, have a great year.
Thank you. Y'all too.